Okay, we're back for what I promise is the last of my rambling for now. So we've talked a little bit about the immigrant experience in terms of coming over to America. And we talked a little bit about the immigrant experience trying to get settled on in primarily the cities of America. But now we're going to talk about how they continue to live and what were some of the effects on the national level. So part of this was this idea that these political machines started popping up. Now, this is only a brief intro to this. We'll be reading a little bit more about the politicians at this time, but this is just to kind of whet our palate a bit. So a guy named William Bostweed, we should remember his name. So he was a leader of the New York City's corrupt political organization called the Tammany Hall. Now, this occurred during like the 1860s and 1870s. And so Tammany Hall was what we would consider a political machine. So this idea is we are going to organize this political group, and it was informal, but it was definitely organized. They had a motive, they had a purpose. And their idea was to keep power within local governments. So they would provide services for immigrants that were essential to their quality of life. So they would say, hey, we'll improve the sanitation system, which I know, like, not having good sanitation in the city right now is making you and your family sick. It's not fair. So we will provide this service in exchange for your vote. So they kept offering these certain services, and therefore the immigrants kept being like, yeah, sure, if you're going to do all that, awesome, we will vote for you. So because the immigrants were such a high population of the voters, especially in the cities, places like New York City where Tammany Hall was operating, kept staying in power because they just had the immigrants sitting in the palm of their hand. Because what else were they to do? Even though these guys were corrupt, they were promising things that we needed for our health and for our happiness. We seemed like we had no choice but to put our votes towards him. Sorry. There we go. So, again, some of these problems that led to political machines, let's break it down a little bit. So this idea that cities are growing too fast and their local municipal governments. So if we're thinking about like in today's government setup, like if we are Philadelphia and we're growing so fast that City Hall and the councilmen and women can't keep up with the needs of the people. The infrastructure of the city just isn't there. There's too many, there's too poor sanitation, too poor housing. We just can't keep up with it all. So things also like the transit system, the water and sewage systems, the safety systems, right? So like cops and fire departments, all of them, with how many people were coming in, with everything that was going on, the cities just couldn't keep up with it. So the solution then to this problem seemed to be that this political machine, the informal but organized group of men in the city would step in and they would provide some of these services to fix the transit systems, to fix the water and sewage systems, to fix sanitation, to offer better protection for folks in exchange for services and money. So sometimes like the local governments would even give money towards these campaigns because they're like, hey, you can solve this problem, great. You do this, I'll donate money to you, and also I will vote for you. So they came into power. So these political machines would work to make sure that the candidates that they wanted to get elected would get elected because they would put people up front who were part of this political machine, and in turn, they would make sure they do what they need to do for the people to vote, do enough to just baseline meet their needs, and then their people would be in power. The things to take away, though, because I think that at times it can be like, well, that makes sense, right? Like you do something nice for someone, you got to pay it back. But ultimately, these political machines were corrupt. They were frauds. They often cheated to win elections. So they would send people out to vote more than once. And they were also corrupt in terms of like this idea of a graft. So a graft is when you use political influence for personal gain. And sometimes it's like, maybe that's not the worst thing in the world. There could be like an honest graft where you might be using some of the information that you gain from a certain position to make better decisions and to try to get like a leg up or whatever in society. However, these guys were doing the corrupt grafts, meaning they were doing things like bribery. So they were trying to get businesses to offer them money in order to get certain contracts with the city so that they could stay in power. So like if I were a business owner owning a like a horse and carriage rental company, right? And so you need to get around the city. You had horse and carriages, horse and buggies. I would try to be like, hey, political machine folk over at Tammany Hall, I will give you my votes if you make sure that you contract with me once you're in power. So then these people would get elected because the votes would be in there. And then once these political machine members were actually in the government and could have the say over who gets these sort of business contracts and who doesn't, they would turn to the pockets of their friends, right? So it was this very corrupt, very bribe-centric, fraudulent system that was running the local governments and guys in the way of helping the immigrants and the poor within the city, but ultimately it was really just buddies helping out buddies. So some more images of city life to kind of hit home the idea that city life was so tough and so gross and so unhealthy and unsanitary that it was easy to see why these political machines sprung up. So the growth of cities resulted in an increase in overcrowding, poor housing, crime, murder, fires, high infancy deaths, unsanitary conditions, pollution, disease, and death. It was tough. So here are some more images, again, just to hit home this point. Like, if these were the types of conditions with this much terrible sanitation, terrible quality of life, how else can people go through without thinking like, hey, maybe if I throw some votes at someone who says that they're going to help me, I guess I should. So this was the perfect environment for corrupt political machinery to spring up and to control the city. So part of these terrible living conditions were the housing. So we're going to talk a little bit about tenement housing right now. So tenements were where the majority of urban dwellers lived. And so tenements were dark, crowded, multifamily apartments. This image I always think kind of reminds me of, if you guys have ever seen the old school Willy Wonka, where Charlie, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is, I guess, the full name, but where Charlie is living in like a really tight apartment with both sets of grandparents, his parents, siblings, and all that, right? And it's dark, it's cramped, they're sleeping from like head to toe. It's clearly dirty in the room, right? That's the kind of image that we have of this tenement housing, where multi-generations of families are living in like one small kind of cubicle-like apartment, all on top of each other with not much room to move. So you can see here it also wasn't well vented. The sanitation was bad. You can see how dirty everything was. You can see that they were only getting warmth from that small stove oven. Now, that takes us to how cities have evolved over time. So this was the first real emergence of urban America. And now since the 1870s to modern day, we see how cities have adapted to the people and to the needs of their citizens better. So we've added better quality of life. You'll see how much more green space, right? Just bringing in some fresh air, bringing in some trees, bringing in some green space, spreading out the city more so it's not so compact, making sure that city conditions are better for residents. So a lot has clearly changed, but I think in terms of the tenement housing, we can make a lot of different comparisons to some housing in Philadelphia today. We can also make comparisons to some of the conditions that folks that we read about in Evicted were living in, right? I think there's a lot of places that you can draw those comparisons. So with that, we have the intro to this unit. So this immigration piece, this city piece, is going to serve as the lens through which we start talking about this idea of the Gilded Age, which we will talk about when we reconvene on Tuesday together. But hopefully with some good notes and between this lecture and the reading that you did, you'll have a really clear idea of what the immigrant experience was like, what the city experience was like, and how those things were connected, and how we can keep seeing that and leaning on that knowledge to influence our understanding of of America as we keep moving through more modern history and as we think about our world today. So thank you for watching. Thank you for your hard work and taking good notes. And I will look forward to talking about this with you guys on Tuesday. Have a wonderful and safe weekend. Bye, guys.